Bon día, buenos días desde Barcelona. Good evening in Sydney. Estamos aquí para dar comienzo al webinar sobre the online exams with integrity at scale and authentic. Un webinar que estará centrado en la evaluación digital, o básicamente en los aspectos que conciernen a las pruebas y exámenes finales y, como dice el título del seminario, a su integridad, a su escalabilidad y a su carácter auténtico. En la UOC estamos inmersos desde hace algunos semestres y a partir de los cambios que la pandemia introdujeron en un proceso de mejora continua de la evaluación. Nuestra evaluación es principalmente una evaluación basada en la continuidad, es una evaluación continua, pero que en algunas de sus asignaturas cuentan también con pruebas y exámenes finales, con lo cual el proceso en el que estamos inmersos lo que pretende es virtualizar el conjunto de la evaluación, encontrar nuevos modelos, nuevas fórmulas que nos permitan mejorar todo este proceso y que además nos garanticen la identidad y la originalidad de los trabajos que se presentan a lo largo de los programas, tanto en su proceso de evaluación continua como en el proceso de evaluación final. Las pruebas de virtualización de la evaluación final que se llevaron a cabo durante la pandemia como consecuencia de los confinamientos nos llevaron a una situación en la que pudimos realizar en un primer momento más de 30.000 pruebas y después consolidar más de 60.000 pruebas y exámenes finales virtuales, con un proceso logístico y de seguimiento académico que ha funcionado de una manera muy homogénea y muy interesante. Estamos en estos momentos perfilando y mejorando todos estos procesos porque lo que queremos es consolidar esa evaluación completa, continua y final de manera digital, de manera virtual, más allá de las constricciones de la pandemia. Para ello tenemos con nosotros al doctor Mathew Hillier. Thank you very much, Dr. Hillier, for being here, sharing and imparting this seminar. Dr. Mathew Hillier is a professor from Macquarie University in Sydney, and he's specialized in digital assessment. He's been working on this for years, and we found that their works are very interesting for us here in the Open University of Catalonia, and it's for that we invite him to be here today presenting and imparting this seminar. So thank you very much, Dr. Hillier. Y sin más que presentar, pues damos comienzo a este seminario. Yo voy a tener que marchar antes porque tengo otro compromiso, pero les aseguro que voy a seguir después con mucho detenimiento toda la evolución de esta interesante sesión. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gràcies, vicerector Segales. Moltes gràcies per fer aquest espai a l'agenda i obrir aquest webinar sobre un aspecte tan cabdal com és l'evolució de l'avaluació digital, un tema que estem treballant de manera transversal internament des de tots els estudis, des de servei de campus, des de l'àrea de serveis acadèmics, des de l'e-Learning Innovation Center de la UOC, des de l'e-Link. Gracias a todos. Welcome, Dr. Hillier, and thank you very much for accepting our invitation. It's an honor to come with you sharing your experience in e-assessment. We greatly appreciate your participation. Thank you also to all the audience connected by now. Gracias a todos los que estáis ahora mismo conectados por vuestro interés y també per iniciar els que són de la comunitat UOC aquesta setmana amb aquesta activitat, el que anomenem el Walk to the Future, una iniciativa que vol transcendir i fer que compartim entre tots les innovacions docents i tots els temes que ens preocupen per anar construint la UOC del futur. Con esta actividad, esta actividad es una de las muestras de una de las funciones más importantes del E-Link, de nuestro centro de innovación, que es hacer de radar de lo que pasa más allá de nuestra universidad en temas de e-learning y compartirlo tanto internamente como con con el resto de nuestro ecosistema y hacer transferencia de conocimiento. Como os decía, esta iniciativa forma parte de los actos previos digitales que culminarán el día 2 de junio en el Hotel Alimara de Barcelona. Es un encuentro de la comunitat docente, bàsicamente, de la UOC en Barcelona, i esperem que aquells que encara no us heu inscrit ho feu ja, perquè tenim un aforament limitat. En el xat d'aquest canal de YouTube trobareu l'enllaç per accedir al website de Walk to the Future, on també penjarem aquesta sessió. A la secció comparteixo, pero veréis en este enlace que os pasamos que hay muchos otros contenidos en otras secciones, como en la de Explico, donde encontraréis herramientas y recursos de aplicación a un montón de proyectos y experiencias de innovación educativa de la UOC y del mundo. No quiero alargarme más, dadle un vistazo, que estamos de estreno, pero será un lugar vivo donde iremos subiendo más contenidos que, como os decía, nos ayuden a construir la UOC del futuro, pero también el e-learning del futuro. Doy ya paso a Montse Domena, que es una de las partners del e-link que ha preparado el webinar que presentará a Dr. Hillier y le trasladará al final de su presentación las preguntas que vayáis planteando por el chat. Quan vulguis, Montse, i moltíssimes gràcies també a tu per tota la feina i per conduir aquesta sessió.
Un plaer. Moltes gràcies, vicerector. Gràcies, Sílvia. Bon dia des de Barcelona. Good evening in Australia. We are pleased to welcome you, Dr. Hillier, to the Universitat Oberta de Catalunya. I'd like to introduce today one of the most important experts on e-assessment. És un plaer presentar-vos a un dels experts més reconeguts en avaluació virtual avui en dia. Per a les persones assistents que no conegueu el doctor Mathew Hillier, podem dir que és especialista en avaluació digital en l'educació superior i actualment treballa com a acadèmic d'avaluació virtual a la Universitat Macquarie de Sydney. També és copresident de la sèrie internacional de webinars Transforming Assessment, que posen especial interès en l'avaluació virtual de la societat australasiana en l'aprenentatge per ordinadors en l'educació terciària. Recentment, també va dirigir un projecte nacional amb 10 socis universitaris que van explorar com fer que els exàmens en línia siguin més autèntics. És acadèmic honorari de la Universitat de Monash, a la Universitat de Canberra i acadèmic adjunt de la Universitat de Tasmània. Anteriorment, ha ocupat llocs de desenvolupament acadèmic a la Universitat de Nova Gal·les del Sud, a la Universitat de Monash, de Queensland i a la Universitat d'Adelaide i ha ocupat funcions docents en sistemes d'informació empresarial, d'arts multimèdia i de gestió de projectes d'enginyeria a Austràlia, Singapur i Hong Kong. Com veieu, el doctor Hillier té un extens currículum i segur que la seva experiència serà enriquidora per a tothom. Us animem a formular preguntes pel xat de YouTube que al final del webinar traslladarem al nostre convidat. Os animamos a formular preguntas a nuestro experto a través del chat de YouTube, que posteriormente le vamos a trasladar a nuestro invitado. We encourage the attenders to ask questions in chat on YouTube. Later, we will transfer them to our expert. Dr. Hillier, thank you so much for being at this seminar, sharing your experience with us. It's a pleasure for us that you accepted our invitation in this webinar. And without further ado, I shall give the floor to Dr. Hillier.
Thank you very much. I assume I need to start sharing my screen. Okay, I think that one's the right one. So welcome. Good evening from Australia. Good morning in España, in Spain, in Europe, wherever you're coming from. I'm going to be talking about online examinations in particular, but there's also some background in previous work around online assessment more generally. But the philosophy, I guess, has been moving from my prior work in general assessment towards examinations in computer labs on campus to when the pandemic occurred to online examinations. So this will be the kind of the focus. Now, ladies and gentlemen, if you want to obtain the slides, if you go to transformingassessment.com/UOC 2022, you'll be able to download a PDF copy of these slides. That will allow you to follow along a bit easier. So the motivation for a lot of my work is this, what I call the gap between the real world of work, society, which is complex, which has a lot of technology, a lot of information, a lot of working amongst people, etc., versus the primary mechanism that we have been assessing students, particularly at the higher stakes end of the spectrum, that is through examinations. And by and large, examinations, until very recently, have been pen on paper. Now, pen on paper, all you have to do to demonstrate your expertise is a piece of paper and a pencil, and you are locked in a room somewhere, and you're not allowed to touch the internet, you're not allowed to use any software tools, etc. Which means it's very difficult for the student to be able to demonstrate 21st century skills, the problem-solving skills, as they would be able to do in the workplace, let alone what is coming with things around the fourth industrial revolution, artificial intelligence, robotics, etc., that our students are going to have to demonstrate their expertise and their competency in high stakes assessment. Pen on paper is just not cutting it anymore. So if we look, for example, at the World Economic Forum recently put out a report in 2020 on the future of jobs, and they looked at the skill sets that they felt through a rather large survey of employers around the world, what sort of skills and competencies do they think will be in demand in 2025? So here is a list, the top 15. You can see it's analytics, it's problem solving, it's critical thinking. But down at 7, 8, and 9, we've got things like technology use, right? Design, programming. So using modern tools of the trade, which are these days software applications, to be able to solve problems. So pen on paper exams, obviously it is impossible to do a lot of that stuff. You can do, yes, critical analysis. You can do, complex problem solving to an extent if it's written down and presented, but most problem solving these days in some way will involve computer software, and you cannot do with that with a piece of paper. So we have this gap about what we're going to be doing. Along comes the COVID-19 pandemic, and in fact it presents, whilst this is a big crisis for the world and very disruptive to education, particularly for institutions that had on-campus classes, much less so for online universities because that was their business operations anyway. They were already teaching online, but many education around the world has been disrupted. And what this has given, at least many universities in other ways, is a flowering of different thinking about how we can do assessment differently and perhaps better. Now, in Australia, even a lot of the distance universities also still ran on-campus pen on paper examinations in examination centres. And when the pandemic happened, even the distance education providers could not do that anymore. So they have to look at alternatives of how to assess students completely in the online environment, no face-to-face anymore. So it was even a challenge for them as well. But it has been a big opportunity. Now, what I would like to do is hopefully get you to vote on this idea of authentic assessment. So I guess I've been driving towards this the first couple of slides. I'm thinking about what are the modern skills, 21st century skills that people are going to be in demand. If you have the opportunity to go to menti.com, use the code 71139611 to be able to vote on this. Type in 1 or 2 words what you think authentic assessment means to you, and maybe relate it to your discipline area, your area of your professional knowledge that you are teaching. So think about what is authentic assessment for in your course or in your subject, in your degree program. I'll leave a little bit time for the voting because now I need to swap to the other slide to see if any votes are coming in, and hopefully it's working. let's just see if anything's coming through. I won't hang too long because I realize there is a delay. Okay, here we got some coming through. I realize you probably can't see it, but that's fine. Confidence is one word that has come through. Interesting interpretation, great. Originality and identity, excellent. Real world tasks, students can do. Interaction, personalized. Accountable, original. Thank you. I can see some wonderful words there. Okay, I will move on, but you may continue to type them in, and I will summarize and send back to Montice, and she may be able to distribute to the audience at a later time. Okay, back to the slides. Now, there are three kind of elements, I guess, in tension when we think about authenticity. We desire different things from assessment, right? So one of them is authenticity. We'd like our assessments to represent the kinds of problems that students will need to face when they go out into the world, into their profession, in their social lives, in their in their voluntary lives, if they want to volunteer, etc. So many problems the world are facing at the society level, but also at the individual level. And a lot of these problems are rich, they're complex, they're messy, they're what are called wicked problems. And, you know, as I've sort of said, that the 21st century, the WEF skill set that was arranged hasn't been well served previously. So that's the core idea for me around what authenticity is reflective of the complexity, the kinds of problems that students will face, okay? So in order to increase authenticity, we're thinking about things like assessment as learning. Designing assessments that are learning tasks in themselves is also referred to as assessment for learning, okay? Now, what I'm comparing this is the traditional, I guess, assessment as of learning being a summative assessment. So formative versus summative, I guess. But the idea of formative assessment in its strictest sense is it's about learning, but it's not necessarily adding marks up. But in something like an examination or a high stakes test, it's a little bit different. So it's assessment as learning. Even though you're having an exam, it still can be a learning opportunity for the students, a problem solving activity. So this will develop critical self-judgment for students to be able to see how they're progressing. Assessment as learning, assessment for learning is about students learning as they go, learning as part of doing the assessment, but also them gaining an appreciation of where they fit at their standard level, right? Where are they at the standards expected of them? So essentially, we need to go beyond what I would call the paper paradigm of assessment. Right? We need to broaden out what is possible in the examination space to allow those kinds of assessments to be set. Now, the other issue, which is a practical one, and this is probably focused on, on the institution, on the teachers and the administrators more than anything, is this idea of assessment needing to be practical and doable, given the resources that are available to the students and to the teachers and the university. There is little point having extremely complex, rich assessments if they simply cost too much to run or people don't have the time to do them. So I think there has to be some recognition that the assessment tasks, the methods we use for assessment have to be doable for the institution, for the teachers and for the students, because students are also under increasing time pressure these days where there are many things going on in their lives. Another aspect, of course, with assessment, we need to worry about validity. We need to worry about things like academic integrity to make sure that the student who is doing the assessment is the one that we have enrolled on the degree program, right? That they have not outsourced their assessment. So security, integrity, identity, checking the conditions under which the student is doing the assessment is according to the desired conditions that we have set. Measuring what is intended, of course, is that educational measurement theory still matters. in this space. We need to make sure that we are measuring what we should be measuring, and we're not measuring something like, oh, your ability to have electricity in your house, or a fast internet connection, or your ability to type quickly, unless it's a typing exam. But you know, we have to make sure we're measuring, the assessment designs is measuring what we want it to measure. I would also add in equity, accessibility, ethics, and fairness into this, because if we are developing assessments that are fundamentally unfair to certain students, they are not going to be able to perform as they would in the real world. They won't have access to adjustments or assistance or the tools that they would have in their real world. So the assessments also have to be equitable, accessible, and fair if we want a valid assessment, if we want valid measurement. And I would have to make the comment here that online examinations are still just an examination at the end of the day. And if we're thinking about how valid or cheatable an examination is, I think in the online space, we need to do at least as well as paper. It doesn't have to be dramatically better, as long as it's not worse, right? So I would say that anti-cheating, greater than equal of paper, is good enough. We are not going to expect miracles here, and we cannot expect miracles, right? So I think there's that boundary on expectations for us as teachers to think about, what do we expect out of an online assessment environment? And these elements are in tension. And what I mean by that, they're competing with each other. So we have authenticity, validity, and scalability. Which ones are going to be important for you as the teachers, for the students, for the institution, for the society, right? So when we are designing education programs more generally, we need to think about how these forces interact with each other. So the idea is, you may have heard of the project management iron triangle of good, quick, cheap, pick two. Well, in this case, I think we kind of have to try and have all three, and that's acknowledged to be difficult. It's not necessarily easy to achieve all three. What I've tended to notice when I looked at the commercial market for online testing systems, what I have noticed is scalability and validity have been quite strong in the representations of how the affordances of the online testing technologies. What you tend to get is an online quiz that has been locked down with no access to other tools of the trade, no access to the internet in general, etc. So what this has tended to happen, yes, it's scalable and may have quite high degree of validity with, psychometrics on multiple choice questions and lockdown browsers and all of these sorts of things. But a lot of these software environments have not allowed assessment designers to produce authentic tasks or allow students to do authentic tasks during that examination. So that would be, I guess, my criticism for that. Now, what I would like you to do is to also vote on that. Now, I need to go back to the other window. Excuse me for a minute. Okay, hopefully it's moved on to the next one. Okay, so when I go to the next slide, sorry, I'm swapping between windows here. So let's go down. The next one, I'm going to ask you to choose. Now, if you could only choose two of those three elements, which would you have as your highest priorities? Again, go to the Menti, reload the page, type in the code, and then hopefully you'll be able to vote on which of the pairs that you think you should prioritize. So should you pick authenticity and validity? Should you pick authenticity and scalability? Or should you pick validity and scalability? Here is an indication of where perhaps your priorities may sit. And it's interesting to see how people will vote. I'll just swap back to the other screen to see how things are going. We've got 3 votes in so far. Oh, we've got 4, 5, 6. Okay, we've got some votes coming in now. Thank you very much. And I'll read out the results in a minute because it's a bit complicated to swap screens. So far, one of them is in the lead. tell you who that is in a minute. Okay, more votes coming in. Thank you very much for voting. More votes coming in, more votes. We have 17 votes so far. Thank you very much for voting. 18 votes. Okay, I think the pattern has settled down now. I think we're getting somewhere towards a valid sample. So far, we have around 20 odd votes, I think. I can't quite see the corner now. Authenticity and validity has won the race. Congratulations, authenticity and validity. In second place is validity and scalability. And in third place at the moment, authenticity and scalability. So, okay, it's evening up. Authenticity and validity, 13 votes. Validity and scalability, 7 votes. And authenticity and scalability is 6 votes. So thank you very much. Once I've received all the votes, I will pass the results over to Montice and she can distribute to the community. Let me just get back to the main screen. So thank you very much for contributing your votes to that exercise. Now, one thing we have probably learnt, and I guess in an online university like yourself at UOC, you'll know that technology is an important part of the delivery of education to students, particularly these days. I have worked mostly in what we call blended university in Australia, where a lot of the students still attend the campus, but we have a small cohorts of students who are online. And the mix of those students is changing. A lot more students are now choosing more online as part of their study program. So they might have like 2 classes on campus and 3 or 4 or 5 classes online. So they're choosing that flexibility. Now, technology is a key enabler to us delivering high quality education at scale that's hopefully authentic as well. So technology has a role to play in curriculum, what we teach, in how we teach it through the pedagogy, but also, of course, the support systems that we have available to us as educators or administrators to be able to support the whole education endeavour. So we need to think about the technology tools that we choose as an institution and as individual teachers. You know, in the curriculum side, 21st century skills, the WEF pointed out digital literacies, digital skills, using technology to solve problems, right? If we look at things like the UNESCO Digital Literacy Global Framework, people as users, creators, etc. Technology is something that our future graduates, our graduates will have to be able to do to operate effectively in their professions. So our curriculum must include that as well. A richer tool set to enable teachers to develop technology-enabled authentic assessment tasks as well. So not only do we want our students to learn digital skills, our teachers have to have digital skills in order to create suitable assessments through particularly the online mechanisms. Now, the underlying technology and infrastructure in our institutions is also important to enable this to happen. We often have a standardized learning management system, a lecture capture or recording system, maybe an e-portfolio system. And those technology tools come with certain characteristics, affordances that allow us to do certain things and maybe prevent us from doing other things, which is also important to consider the boundaries. So when an institution is choosing technology tools, they need to think about where they want their pedagogy, where they want their curriculum to be going, and can those tools facilitate or enable that change, that evolution to happen? I think it's really quite an important decision that often gets overlooked. So technology is an enabler. If we look at SAMAR model, I think it's kind of a nice indicator and gives us a barometer, if you will, about what kinds of things, what kind of efforts we can put technology to. How can we use technology to create new ways of doing things, more authentic forms of assessment? So how have we used the affordances or the capabilities of different technology tools to change or redefine how we can do assessments? In what ways can we have authenticity, scalability, and validity? Right? How can technology help us to choose that? And as I said, the choices around technology is important. Stuart Allen gave a webinar in Transforming Assessment back in 2020 to discuss this idea of migration versus redefinition in assessment. If you are thinking about, oh, I just want to put my pen and paper exam online, you could migrate, or in same sense, you might substitute an online multiple choice exam for a pencil and paper one. So you might just move from paper to online. But you can do a lot more with technology. So above the line, we're thinking about, can we use technology to redesign the task? Can we use technology to produce a task that we couldn't do before? It was just not possible to do it in the pen and paper or the face-to-face world. Can we create things, simulations and things like that are perhaps something we could not do before? So examples, how can we do this? Let's have a brief look. Conscious of time, of course, so some of these examples will fly past fairly quickly, but I will give you I've given you the slides so that you can hopefully have a look at the links and things in a little more detail later. We can think about alternative assessment formats. I'm sorry, I've had a brain freeze because I can't remember the name of the people who did it in the UK. I'll think about it in a minute. An exam so alternative assessments are things like, what can we get, instead of having an exam, what sort of things could we have our students do instead of an exam to still assess in a high stakes manner? And then exam-like assessments, okay, it looks and smells like an exam, but it might have more authentic characteristics to it. Computerized examinations and using the technology in clever ways. So here's my first example from Griffith University in Australia. They do what they call online interactive oral assessments. Now, this is not a traditional Viva exam. It's designed to be much more authentic. So it's centered around a realistic scenario that the student has to work through. And the online presentation is not a presentation, but it's their reaction. It's a conversation with the student and the examiner. So we can have things like a job interview scenario, a mock media interview. It could be a pitch to a client or a pitch to a board of directors. You may choose to, present and argue or defend an artifact you have produced. So let's just say you're an art student and you've produced a sculpture. You may have to present and argue and have a discussion around what is the philosophy behind that sculpture. So there are many possibilities for this online format. We are leveraging the affordances of online technologies like a booking tool and MS Teams or Zoom or Blackboard Collaborate, an online conferencing tool, to be able to have these interactive high stakes assessment tasks. Now, students have to be prepared for these, and there's a whole lot of guidelines. I would encourage you to go and look it up. There's a tiny URL /IO-assessments to the team at Griffith University that have developed this method. And they're also happy to support other universities to create communities to practice in their own areas. I would highly recommend people follow that up. Another example is a virtual immersive environment. If you remember, probably 10 years ago, the space called Second Life was really a popular thing at universities, and it's since disappeared. But I suspect some of this stuff will start coming back. May not be Second Life, but maybe something else. But I think the ideas inherent in here still hold. So that is task-based language learning, for example, that can be used for assessment tasks. Here's a colleague, Scott Grant at Monash University in Australia, former colleague of mine, developed what he called Chinese Island. He was teaching Chinese language, and he used this virtual immersive environment for task-based language learning activities. And it was more than just going in and pretending to be somebody. There's a whole transaction, a discussion that the students in their virtual character have to interact with the environment in order to achieve an aim. So an aim might be cook a bowl of noodles, but in order to cook the bowl, you have to go to the farmer's market and buy something. In order to get to the farmer's market, you've got to ask directions, and so on and so on. So there's a whole lot of activities and language use that has to be successful in order for the students to achieve the ultimate aim of cooking the bowl of noodles. So it's more like a game, I suppose you could call it like that, but it's a game with a particular learning purpose behind it. Another one is work integrated learning. Again, this is a transforming assessment webinar. You can look it up. There's a link down there, held in 2018. Again, I think whilst this was before the pandemic, it certainly would have come into its own during the pandemic, because we could not send students to workplaces on their placements anymore. So something like a virtual integrated learning experience for work integrated learning would be appropriate. So there was a mix of virtual simulated worksite and communication with real people at real workplaces doing real projects. But they were just through things like Zoom or MS Teams collaboration environment, okay? Or you could use GitHub if it was a programming environment, all right? So whatever online environment that matches or works for your discipline, your profession, you could have students interacting with professionals, guiding them through workplace projects that they might be doing, but also mix it with some elements of simulation that they would have perhaps have got if they'd gone to a workplace itself. Again, this sort of thing is scalable because once you've created a simulation, you can then use it again. The next one looks, I guess, more like an traditional exam, an online examination, but we augment it and we try to slightly redefine it a bit using technology tools. So this work actually examples came out of a project that the national project that I did, which is now finished. And the project was run before the pandemic happened. So there's a little bit of change because we aren't able to do on-campus computerized exams anymore. But the idea is you take a traditional exam and you start moving it towards more and more authentic task design within the context of the exam. So you could start with a Word document or an online quiz, and then you start augmenting with technology tools with extra resources that the students can use. Could be programming, could be large data sets, could be videos, could be spreadsheets, could be CAD applications, could be the Chinese island environment, okay? So there's all sorts of ways of augmenting. The idea is to link to these other activities. So for example, let's look at leveraging tools, e-tools of the trade. In finance and economics and things like that, spreadsheets are a tool of the trade. Why not get students to manipulate, to use spreadsheets during the examination? All right. Here is the example from the project. Basically, it was just they attached a spreadsheet file, and then they coded the question to accept the responses that the students are more likely to put in once they have manipulated the spreadsheet in their computer. Another one, we get the student to create a small computer programming using Scratch. Scratch is a computer programming environment commonly used for beginners in computer programming. It's not necessarily an advanced tool, but I think the concept still holds. In this case, we want the student to program something according to a set of instructions. They have to submit the program that they have created in a file, and they have to explain about how they went about doing that in their text response. So I guess it's a two-part or a two-element response in this case, an authentic task they have to do. They have to create a program. So they're not writing computer code on pen and paper anymore. They're actually using computers to program in an exam. And that's, I guess, towards being more authentic. Then something like at a Chinese language examination. This is actually a real example for one of the exams we ran during the project. The students were able to, or asked to translate between English and Chinese, and they were given a computerized dictionary and translation tool that they might perhaps have in their future employment situation. So they're allowed to use digital computer tools of the trade to be able to solve problems, in this case a translation task, and respond to the quiz questions in the learning management system. So they're allowed to use these other software tools, right? Of course, we can use some multi-part quiz tools. make more complex questions. If you've got access to things like Moodle, your quiz tool, you can do, what they call closed question types. You can use multimedia as prompts, of course. I think this is not particularly revolutionary. We do need to be wary of things like how big the video files are, for example. Are all the students going to be on stable internet? We need to think about and consider these things. So we can't stick like a 20-minute video in there because that's a bit crazy, but we might be able to stick a 3-minute video in, for example. A combination of the closed question type and audio, a listening test. This is another example from the Chinese language exam that we did in 2018. We had students listening to sound clips and we had students typing in what they heard. This was using closed question type and audio files, and the students used headsets to be able to listen to the sounds. So that way they didn't disturb their colleagues. We can also get students now to respond using video or audio. If you're lucky enough to have Moodle, it now has the Atto editor, has a 3-minute recording feature, and you can ask students to speak a response or video record them, video called a short response, a very short response. But it adds some degree of integrity, because if the student is speaking or you can see their face, at least you are sure that the student is in the room and they haven't got somebody else to do the whole exam. Right? So there's some elements of identity checking in here as well. But you could have them, doing an oral response might be good for language speaking test, a music performance, interpreting. There's all sorts of uses that you could put a multimedia response built into your LMS quiz as part of an examination scenario. Now, if we think about integrity, the validity side of the triangle, we need to think about what are the conditions around what brings students to cheat, what might be tempting. A lot of research by Tracy Brightag in 2018, thereabouts. They did a big research project in Australia around academic integrity across 8 universities. Over 1,000 teachers and 14,000 students responded to their surveys. I think I'll focus on the critical elements here. Cheating influences are things that lead students more likely to cheat than not. And they found the big 3 were dissatisfaction with teaching and learning. The students felt they were not supported adequately. If this is the situation, it leads students to cheat more than otherwise. Perceptions there are opportunities to cheat is another one. And the third one was when students are from a language background that does not match the language of instruction. In Australia, the language of instruction is English, but we have a lot of students from foreign countries come to our country to study. And we will find if the students are struggling with the language of instruction of the course, then it can lead them to choose poorly, to ask somebody else to do the assignment, okay? So these are, I think, some background issues. Now, they also asked these 14,000 students what kind of assessments that they were more likely and less likely to cheat on. So the higher bars on this display here shows that the type of characteristic of the assessment, the students said, oh, I am more likely to cheat on something that is short turnaround time, heavily weighted, continuous tasks, sequenced assessment for some reason, final tasks. Less likely to cheat on things that are personalized, completed in class, things that are Viva exams, like a speaking exam, or reflections. And what I've noticed is there is a bit of a trend. So those things that are highly pressurized, where there is not a sense of presence, where the task is the same for all students, are more likely to be cheated. So if you can personalize a task, if you can provide some form of interaction with the task, it's less easy to cheat. Another thing that the Brightag research came out was awareness. So 1 in 5 students, only 1 in 5 students said that their teaching staff talked to them about cheating. So one thing that we can do is make the students aware that we know and we are thinking about cheating. because a lot of the time teachers don't bother to mention it in the class or have a discussion in the class about cheating and the implications of it. So if we can talk to students about cheating, how to behave correctly, it can help us to reduce the cheating rate, just because the students are thinking, the teacher must be looking, right? And it also says, I care. So as a teacher, when we're talking about academic integrity, it also says to the students in an indirect way, I care about this course. I care about you guys. I care about the outcomes. Right? So what sort of things can we do? Personalization of teaching and learning relationship. The good old community of inquiry model of social, cognitive, and teacher presence, particularly important for the online university, where we have to be present as teachers. We have to be communicating to students, okay? There has to be a social capital behind our interactions with students. Engaging students in assessment design. That's the idea of students as partners in assessment design. And that could be discussions around assessments, providing student options of topics or design or submission methods, or providing them, get them involved in designing the assessment rubric, for example. So in an online university, maybe what you do, you set up a Zoom class and you have a discussion with your cohort around what do you think the priorities are in this assessment task? What should be the requirements? What should be the standards? And have a discussion. That brings the sense of ownership on the part of students into assessment. Customizing it, of course, relating it to personal experiences, relating it to the discipline, relating it to things that are in the current environment, the current media, the current world affairs, makes it more difficult to cheat. You know, asking somebody to do an assignment on the marketing strategy of Coca-Cola, well, that's not current, and it's more likely to be already a packaged answer available on the internet for that one, right? So if you make it more localized, more personalized to the student's experience, to the theories and concepts that you're covering in your unit or your course, that is, again, making it more difficult to cheat. So whilst using authentic tasks doesn't solve contract cheating, the research found that contract cheating is still possible. It's just less likely because students see value in something that's more authentic than not. Okay. Another thing we can do is randomizing questions, and I realize we're now starting to run out of time, so I'm going to move a bit faster. There is a design. I would encourage you to look up the links I've provided there in terms of designing fair assessments. Now, remember, I said fair assessment was part of validity for students as well. So how you go about constructing your categories in, say, for example, or your pools of questions in a quiz, you have to have pools that are stratified by topic and stratified by difficulty to make sure that every student gets fair coverage and the same level of difficulty throughout their examination. Now, what I will now share quickly is the experiences running online invigilated exams at Macquarie. And we went through a process to arrive at where we are today. And I'll also briefly mention about the future of what we're doing. So at Macquarie University was a traditional on-campus university where students attend classes. And we had a dramatic shift. Of course, COVID caused that shift. But in Australia, it was only really the beginning of 2020 where we had national lockdown, where students could not attend classes, where we had the big problem with examinations. We had to change very quickly. And what happened is 100% of exams went online, but 0% of them were invigilated. And you can imagine what might have happened with integrity as a result. Since then, we've been allowed to have some amounts of online on-campus teaching. So some exams have come back to the campus, but there's still a strong presence of online exams, and that's bumping around a bit until we learn how to do it properly. Now, before the pandemic, no online exams. Afterwards, lots of online exams. Now, as we get towards 2021, we started doing online invigilation, but we did it in a careful way. I'll show you how in a minute. So at Macquarie, we had what I call a students first strategy. We considered from the student's point of view how they will experience the exam. in the online space, how they would experience the online invigilation or online proctoring, as they call it in America. Our concern was for student well-being, particularly during the pandemic. But in order to deliver a reasonable environment, we have to think about students. We need to think about what space they've got, what is their room like, their equipment available, their internet connectivity. And we have to address student concerns when these things are not adequate. So we need to think about spaces, laptops. We had an equity program. We had financial aid available. Students have privacy and data concerns. We took that on board. We provided advice about how students can help protect their privacy as well. We provided plenty of advice. There was help. There was a network, if you will, of connected groups across the university from different areas that help exams work efficiently in the background. So student services, the IT department, the mental counselors, the well-being officers, right? We set up a telephone live help desk so that students could telephone us, get an answer in real time. The other advice, of course, was to pilot things and build up. Now, what we did was we tried things, or we thought about different ways of doing this. The first one is lockdown browser. That one was pretty quickly no, because lockdown browsers work okay in a computer lab, but they're fairly pointless, bring your own device situation, because the institution does not control the hardware and the software in the computer. On a BYOD laptop, bring your own laptop, your student's laptop, we can't control it. So we found that there was too many ways around them, and it just wasn't worth the trouble. So the next one was an automated recording service, self-help service. Students would log in, they'd install a browser plugin, would record their screen and their webcam. We found a lot of problems with that. Too many technical hoops for the students to jump through, no way for the students to get real-time help, etc. So we surveyed the students' experience for each method. Only 26% of the students would recommend that method. So we thought, okay, no, not very good. The next one was a live invigilation by a very well-known company, an external proctoring provider. Again, we ran through that. I think probably most people know what online proctoring is: live recording, live human, live video. Again, because of the disconnection between the service provider and the university, we found that disconnection was really problematic. We couldn't find out when things went wrong. We asked the provider, oh, the student couldn't do the exam, why not? And they couldn't tell us why not. So there was no sort of way of solving problems there. So problems kept happening. And because the proctorers were just randomly assigned at the last minute to the students, typical call center style operation, there was no way for us to really brief those invigilators in advance, so that we want to do exams in a certain way, they don't understand. So there's this understanding gap between the way the supervisor allocated to the student and the way the student understands the exam's supposed to run. So unevenness in the student experience and the conditions. Finally, we tried Zoom invigilation, and the people were staffed. They were trained by the university through our central exams team. They understand our examinations. We had more options to do different exam designs, and they were also plugged into our problem-solving network. The IT department, the well-being officers, the student services, all of those things could communicate in real time to help solve problems as they arose with our students in the exams. The latest numbers for 2021, late last year was our last exam season. Another one coming up next month, but this is the latest numbers that I have. So you can see quite a few exams were online non-invigilated and online invigilated. So that's the biggest group of exams. So we had roughly a half-half split between examinations that were done without supervision and exams that were done with supervision. We went through a process. We helped our students prepare for these exams. We developed teacher and student resources, and there are some links in the slides that you'll be able to get, hopefully. And I've also prepared a pack of documentation. If you want to send an email to me, I will give you my email at the end. And I'm quite willing to give you a pack of documents that outline how we did the Zoom exams last year. Strongly recommend that there is a practice session for students. And what I mean by practice is no marks, 0 stakes. purely just the students to try it out, test the technology, test that their computer and the internet works. And so they get familiar with the workflow of logging on, waiting in the waiting room, checking their ID, showing their ID on the screen, logging into the learning management system whilst in Zoom, doing the exam and submitting the exam. So once they've stepped through that, their confidence levels go up. They have a lot less technical problems on the day of the exam. Then, of course, we have we run the real exams. The examinations hotline is activated, so that's the telephone helpline for students. We have we can run up to 1,300 students in an examination. That was the biggest exam that I think we ran in November. 1,300 students all doing the exam at exactly the same time, spread across, lots of Zoom rooms with staff observing the students. We also have a supplementary exam period. So if for some reason the student has a problem that we cannot solve, there's still a second opportunity for the student to be able to sit that exam in what we call our supplementary examination period. What does it look like? Flexible exam design, as I've suggested, we can have students do Word documents. They can do, in fact, we have students writing math formulas on paper and scanning them and uploading as well. We can have quiz, we can have Turnitin, we can have a mix of these things in one exam, because the university is setting the rules and we are designing the exam process. Again, we had two main forms. One was an on-screen exam where they typed. The other one was a handwritten exam where they would write it. They would use a mobile device with Microsoft Lens, scan it to a PDF, and then upload it to the learning management system. We also surveyed the students around prior experience. Did they attend the practice session, yes or no? We found that in session 2 last year, November 2021, about 45% of the students chose to attend the practice session. So you can see that whilst it was voluntary, at least it stopped 45% of the students having problems on the day. It was a reasonably successful strategy. Unfortunately, we're not allowed to make practice sessions compulsory, but we can encourage them to do so. We also looked at what sort of methods were being used in the examination. Was it a quiz? Was it an assignment? Was it Turnitin, etc.? And there was an evolution in the kind of exams that were set. So when we first started invigilation, we said to those students who could not attend the on-campus exam, oh, we'll give you the Zoom option. So that was round 1. That was in June 2021. Then in November 2021, we made it available to whole groups or whole units or whole courses. And that's when the mix changed in the type of exams that were done. So in the first half of the year, it was mainly pen on paper exams that were being digitized. And the second half of the year, a lot more of the teachers were using quizzes and things like that in their exam designs. And indeed mixes of tools. So we got data to suggest that most exams just use one tool. Might have been assignment, or it might have been quiz, or it might have been Turnitin. But some exams use two tools. So part A might have been a quiz and part B might have been an essay or a mathematical formula, for example. We also looked at where students were coming from. In the first half of the year, they were mainly offshore. The second half of the year, they were onshore, because that's the way we arranged our pilots. We also surveyed our students as well. I apologize, I realize I'm now probably out of time, so I'm going to just finish off the slides. I think we can probably go to questions and answers now. Is that the plan, folks? 5 minutes. 5 minutes for questions or 5 minutes for speaking?
If you want for speaking.
5 minutes for speaking? Okay. All right. I'll back up and just cover what I'm just going to say. So our survey, we asked students at the practice session, and we asked the students for after they did their final real exam as well. And most of the students rated the Zoom exam experience fairly well. The only thing that I kind of noticed where the drop was, I was able to focus on my exam during the session, was a little bit lower than the other items on the survey. And we found out through the comments and through interviewing students, that was because of the limitations of Zoom itself. So we had to have students 15 students in one Zoom room. we couldn't afford to have one-to-one staff to student ratios. So we had one staff member watching 15 students. And of course, we want to have their microphones turned on so that we can hear if they've been whispered answers under their desk, right? But of course, because when the microphones are on, there is some disturbance of the other students. So there was these kind of issues, and the fact that they need to show their ID card to the invigilator and all the other students can see it. So we need to give some advice about, oh, make sure you put some sticky tape on your signature, your address, your birth date, right? And just have your name and photo showing. That's right. So some concerns like that, I think, cause some distractions for students, particularly the noise coming through. We monitored the call rates as well over the period of time we were running online exams, and you can see the calls per exam were trending down. And to me, that was telling me we were getting better as an institution. The quality control mechanisms and problem solving that we had implemented reduced problems over time. They did come up a little bit in session 2, 2021, because that was the first time we did online invigilation for a large number of students. And of course, it was new. The online Zoom exam was new to many students. They had done quiz exam or Turnitin exam before, but they hadn't done the Zoom exam. So that was a little bit new to people, and that caused a bit of a flood of questions. We did track the kind of issues that were coming through from people. Not surprisingly, IT, technical problems was probably the biggest issue. And again, if you look at the charts on this screen and you look at over time, the orange was the most recent session. In general, they're getting a little bit less over time. So in the first time we ran online exams, there was nearly 500 IT problems that students raised. But when we ran it most recently, those problems reduced to around 200 to 300. So there's been a reduction because we've changed the way we did things to try and help students avoid those technical problems. Personal problems were another one. That one tended to spike a little bit. And again, I think it's because the newness of the Zoom method rather than the exams themselves. But in general, they've been trending down. We also looked at the kind of technical issues that students were facing. And again, the number of technical problems that were a bit more serious that had to be transferred to the IT help desk were reducing over time. So you can see on the bottom chart, the orange bars are much smaller than the green and the blue ones. So to me, that's saying that serious problems are reducing over time. We also allowed students to report via an online form whether there was any errors in their exam paper. So, was the question, double options in an MCQ, for example? So errors in the paper itself. And again, there's been a slight reduction over time, but the question content item there that's still quite high. You can look at the orange bar; it's still quite purple and orange bars there. They're relatively high, so we still have work to do. It's not completely solved, but keep working at it, I guess, is the real message there. Now, I did indicate before what is the problems with a Zoom exam. So with Zoom exam, it's not possible to monitor what's on the student's computer screen. So that's a problem for us. There is sound interruptions because we want to monitor the audio environment, and that feeds through to other students, and the student privacy issues. So those three sort of issues that have come up with our online Zoom invigilated exam, we are now seeking to pilot alternative technology to Zoom, but we want to keep the in-house staffing model. We want to keep the model to say that it's Macquarie University exams officers that are observing our students. So our people observing our students, that's a sort of a key requirement, I felt, to having a good student experience and to allowing us to be flexible with our exam design, so we can iterate towards more authentic designs over time because we control the space, we control that rule set. And I think that's been a key to success so far, is the in-house staffing model. A bunch of references you can read up. I've looked at some of those, but there's some further reading there as well. Kay Samble and Sally Brown were the people I was trying to think of with the alternative forms of assessment. So if you're really looking at methods that are not exams, Kay Samble and Sally Brown, that's that link that I've 2020. I provided a link to sallybrown.net. They've got quite some good ideas about alternative assessment formats or assessment designs that you can use as well. So I think now that's 5 minutes. We can have our questions.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Hillier. It has been wonderful to hear you. In this last part of the seminar, we have got different questions, a lot of questions. Thank you so much to everybody for their questions. The first one is from Javi, and he asked, what do you as professor expect from university in order to transform your existing assessments to more authentic? Apart from money and time, which would be the key requirements for faculty to pedagogical and technology departments in order to achieve that?
Yeah, how long is a piece of string? It's a really good question, because I would call it a classic wicked problem. You know, there are many elements. There are technology elements. So our teachers have to know about the affordances or the capabilities of the technologies themselves that we have in our institution. You know, if you have Moodle, you've got certain capabilities. If you've got a commercial online exam tool, you've got another set of capabilities. But knowing what the limitations are, what the affordances, the capabilities are, is probably the first step. Back further one, we need to make sure we're choosing appropriate technologies. So your technology selection process has to have the ideal of authentic assessment higher up the list of requirements when you're choosing new technologies for use in teaching and learning. So yes, yes, security is important. Yes, scalability is important, but authenticity has to be in the mix. Does this technology allow our teachers to do this? Okay, we've got the capability. Now, how do we encourage and upskill our teachers? Professional development of teachers is really, really important. So, you know, your teaching and learning center has to be equipped and provide knowledge, courses, online materials to help our teachers do assessment designs better. I think that's hopefully answered the question. If not, I'm happy to have another go.
Thank you. Second question. Do you think exams are given too much importance? Wouldn't a continuous assessment model based on all kinds of tasks with technology without any type of exam be fair? Don't like to work hard doing all kinds of tasks, videos, exhibition tasks, etc.?
Yeah, it's a good question. Should we throw away exams and just have continuous assessment? In fact, some degree programs will do that, exactly. But I also think there is horses for courses in the sense that different discipline areas, different types of degree programs are suitable to have a different mix of assessments. That's one thing. So that's the sort of pedagogical argument. Yes, I think we overuse them, but on the other hand, I don't think we're necessarily going to be able to eliminate them either, because there are many reasons: social ranking mechanisms, this authentic security integrity part of things. So the idea of having an examination at the end of a course that summarizes or tries to assess everything the student has learnt up to that point, I think it's still a worthwhile exercise to do it. As I said, there's a lot of reasons why we would still keep exams, but I agree we overuse them. And I think more continuous activity is good. And I think it's particularly suitable in an online environment where we can deploy quite interactive online technologies and simulations and all sorts of things to make continuous assessment more interesting. It shouldn't be just plug and solve problems, math problems every week. It should be more interesting and engaging than that as well. So yeah, we do overuse exams, but we can't eliminate them. That would be my feeling on the matter. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Another one. For your 220 pilot, you gave the percent of how many would recommend each assessment type. Who was asked? Teachers, students, combination?
Students. Yeah. So what we did, if you remember the slide, let me give you an example. So this slide here is the one, I don't know if it's still showing on the screen, but the one with the student survey. We asked the students a very similar set of questions for each one. And the bottom line question was, would you recommend this method to other people? And that was the percentage numbers that I had put under each method. And Zoom scored, can't remember, was 69% said they would recommend or strongly recommend the method. So yeah, it won the race, so we went with that one.
The fourth, Chris asked if this experience was of a final assessment or exam. You might have mentioned, but she didn't catch it, okay?
No problem.
She wonders if students might practice the same kind of exam during the course less once or preferably more times, so that they might have previous opportunities to take on an exam like this.
Yes. Yes, yes, and yes. So yes, it was a final exam. So when we did, those survey results are from students who did final exams in our pilot program. They did have opportunities to practice. We built that into the pilot project, but we also build opportunity for a zero stakes practice session into our current final exams. So actually the practice runs for our upcoming exam period are happening this week and next week. So students have 2 weeks, and the central exams team will run the mock, the pretend exams for the students to come and try the technology, come and try. But I agree, if the students have been doing similar kinds of activity before, you know, maybe you set a small 5% quiz in week 5 and another one in week 7 and another one in week 10, the students become much used to this method. So when they get to the end final, the bigger assessment at the end, they're already very familiar with the way of working. So yeah, if you're going to run quizzes and exams, if you were to use a similar method, it allows the students to familiarize. So yeah, but at the same time, maybe you don't want to overuse online exam methods as well. So yeah.
Thank you.
Any more questions?
Yes, a lot. Joseph Hopkins asked if regarding scalability, any recommendations in terms of personalization for subjects like ours at the UOC with more than 70 students per classroom. Any relevant experience with very large numbers at MQ?
Yeah, so our biggest units, our biggest courses are 1,300 students. If you tell the lecturer in Macquarie he's only got 70 students, he'll be very happy. But yeah, we also have small classes. So yeah, we also have small classes in like the final year or in elective units. So yeah. Personalization doesn't necessarily have to be every student does a completely different assessment, because I don't think that's going to be very scalable. What you could perhaps do is give the students a choice of 3 or 4 topics and allow them to choose. You may give choice in assessment submission method. So you may allow students to write an essay, do a video, do an infographic, create a web portfolio. So you may provide different presentation modes. And again, don't make it unlimited. Give them a choice of 3 or 4, 2 or 3 methods that the students can then choose. So some students may choose topic 3 and do a video. Someone else might choose topic 3 and write the report. Others might choose topic 2 and do an infographic. So you've got a limited number of choices, and that way you don't have to have unlimited marking rubrics, if you will. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Antoni Massage asked, have you ever considered the possibility of performing a random process to select just some students for the final exam would be a sort of quality process control like in the industrial sector, for example.
Yeah, good idea. The problem with that's going to be that how are you assessing the students who are not being randomly selected? We have to select we have to assess the capabilities of each individual student. So what you need to think about what your equivalent assessment is going to be for those students who are not randomly selected. Sometimes it is just a bit easier just to give everybody the same online exam because then everybody has equity. But at the same time, we also, if we think about it, we already do some level of customization. In Australia, students can choose through the Wellbeing Office to have what they call reasonable adjustments. So instead of doing a pen on paper exam, this was back before the pandemic, most students say when to do the pen on paper, but some students with physical disability or something may say, oh, I need to use the computer because I can't handwrite. So there is already some scope, at least in the Australian system, to say, yes, the student can do an equivalent assessment that using a different method. But as to whether you're using online invigilated exam as your random quality control mechanism, that one's a different matter. We in Australia do say, for example, that any student can be randomly called in to do an additional oral assessment as a quality control mechanism against cheating. So we have that backstop, if you will, within the rules of the university to allow a teacher to call in students randomly for oral assessment, even if they've sat their pen on paper exam or their online exam. So yeah, using the online exam as a random thing, I'm not sure, but I don't see why not. You just need to think about how else you're going to assess the students. Next question.
Yes, the last one.
Okay.
Mildred asked, how does this assessment approach affect the management procedures of the university?
How does it affect the management procedures? Is that right?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Let me put it this way. We changed some of our assessment policy documents to allow computers to be used in exams. The overarching strategy went through our central committee process. So that went up to the Strategic Learning and Teaching Committee and the University Senate to approve the fact that you could have online exams. This was actually initiated, some of the policy changes came through before the pandemic because people were already thinking about what if we do computerized exams in the future. But when the pandemic happened, we have to throw all of our exams online. So the university had to approve this. But in terms of how it affects, logistics and staffing, we involved other groups in the university as part of our project. So the Central Exams team, IT, the Learning Management System Support Group, the Student Services Officers, the Faculty Officers, all involved in our rollout of online exams. So, and we have, in the second half of the session, we have weekly meetings with all of the stakeholders across the university so that when we're preparing and rolling up to the exam period, everybody is communicating, all the relevant parts of the university are communicating with each other. And this is quite important, particularly when you first start doing this, to make sure that everybody is communicating, that there isn't any mistakes, that everybody gets a view, and you end up with a better experience. Because, we have, for example, an internal Teams channel that goes live during the exams, and the exams officers, the IT people, the student welfare officers, everybody can see the communications happening in that internal staff Teams channel so that they can step in and solve problems for students as they happen. So new methods like that, new workflow procedures, you have to work this stuff out. Each university has a different structure, and what works with Macquarie, not necessarily going to work for UOC. You guys will have to work out how your management procedures will will accommodate a new way of doing assessment, particularly if you're running them in-house yourselves, like we do through Zoom. Hopefully that answers the question.
Well, it was the last one.
That was the last one. Okay.
Yeah.
How are we for time? Are we done or?
No, it's time. It's a time.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for having me. Very interesting. I will send through the results of the polls that I ran as well, and you can distribute that to the community.
Thank you very much. Matthew, Montse has been problems with her cam. I think you are...
Yes, I don't know why, but I've got a problem, yeah.
That's okay.
Sorry.
I think you are seeing and listening to me properly.
Yeah.
The time is over.
I can hear you, yes, but the camera is not on. That's okay.
Oh. Let me... Now?
Hey, hi,
yes?
Sylvia.
Hi, everybody. The time is over, so we have to stop here, unfortunately. Yep. Thank you very much, Matthew. I am convinced that your contribution today has been very useful and inspiring all our attendees. All the examples that you shared, all the data are a good clues to improve our performance in the assessment. You remembered as the transformation power of preposition. I loved when you started talking about assessment as form of learning. We will bear your advices in mind, and I hope we have the pleasure of seeing you again. Gracias.
Happy to join.
Here in Barcelona or in Sydney.
Yep.
Gracias a tothom, gracias a todos y a todas por vuestras intervenciones i a la comunitat UOC. Ens veiem el dia 2 a la jornada d'innovació presencialment a l'hotel Animara. Bon dia, bona setmana. Good evening, Matthew, and thank you again. Bye bye. See you soon.
Good evening.
Bye bye.
Bye, Matthew.
Okay, does that mean it's finished?
Yeah.